Quod est necessarium est lictum. That which is necessary is legal. We call it the doctrine of necessity. Sheldon Cooper told us about it in season 3 of The Big Bang Theory. Sitcoms is where I learned all of my law. The concept is that extraordinary actions are legally justifiable if they serve to protect the fundamental interest or restore order. If an illegal action is the only way to prevent significant harm or danger, then the action is legal. But how far can you take this? How far can you push this defense? Welcome to a fresh History is Criminal. I had some time this week to do a little digging, so we're going to jump back to 1884 and a case that many first-year law students have grappled with, the Queen versus Dudley and Stephens. The case has been debated in law schools and ethics classrooms and boat trips for over 100 years, so let's dig in. By all accounts, Richard Parker was a likable young man. He had spent time sailing the coastal waters off of England and was excited to have his first chance for a real sea voyage. Hired as a cabin boy by Captain Thomas Dudley, he would be part of a four-man crew charged with sailing the yacht Monette from Southampton, England, to its new owner in Australia. Two experienced seamen, Ned Brooks and Edwin Stephens, rounded out the small crew. The 57-foot yacht was not built for long sea voyages, but had some refitting done and was ready to go. It was also decided that they would skip the Suez Canal, taking the longer route sailing around Africa, a distance of 19,000 nautical miles. While longer, it was thought to be safer due to the high winds and rough seas of the Mediterranean at that time of year. It's unlikely that any of them realized that the name Richard Parker was somewhat jinxed when it came to sailing. The name is shared by a character in the Edgar Allan Poe narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym. In the fictional story, Parker leads a shipboard mutiny. He survives the mutiny only to have the ship wrecked. As the crew starves, it's Parker who suggests they draw straws to decide who to eat first, only to end up drawing the short straw himself. Now remember, this was written in 1838, 46 years before the Monette set sail. 40 years before Poe wrote his fictional account, a real Richard Parker was hanged for mutiny aboard the HMS Sandwich, a somewhat ironic name considering the topic we're talking about today. This was where Poe actually got the name for his character. Now, if anyone on the crew was aware of this coincidence, we don't know. Historically, sailors have always been a superstitious bunch, but maybe they just wrote it off or joked it away. We have no way of knowing. Of course, later, Jan Martel would write The Life of Pi, the story of a young boy stuck on a lifeboat with a tiger. That tiger's name? Anybody? Of course, Richard Parker. I doubt any of them saw the movie, mainly because it wouldn't come out for another 128 years. The four-man crew left port on the 19th of May, 1884, and sailed south towards the coast of Africa. They stopped at Madeira Archipelago, about 250 miles off the coast of Morocco. There they would have taken on provisions before sailing the long push around the Cape of Good Hope, the southernmost point of Africa. It was the 5th of July that a sudden storm caught them off guard. At 57 feet long, the yacht was no match for the raging sea. The three survivors said the ship was hit by a wave that towered over the mast. Swamped, the ship quickly began to sink. With barely enough time, the men, soaked, fearing for their lives, made it to a small lifeboat, just in time to watch the ship go under. In the rush to save themselves, they only managed to grab 2 one-pound tins of turnips. When the weather cleared, they found themselves in dire straits. The nearest land, St. Helena, the island made famous by being the resting place of one Napoleon Bonaparte, and Tristan de Cunhana, the most remote inhabited island in the world, were hundreds of miles away. The sinking had happened so fast they found themselves with turnips, no drinking water, and no hope of navigating to land. A small window of luck came their way when a sea turtle swam a little too close to the boat, giving them a small amount of meat to go with the ration of turnips. Captain Dudley used his penknife to slice thin pieces of turnip and later turtle meat, giving the 4 men meager food rations. They tried to catch rain as the occasional squall passed over. For 12 days, they made do with what little they had. But then, on the 17th of July, they were out of their paltry supplies. 3 days later, Parker, suffering from the pangs of thirst, began gulping down seawater. Now, it is known today that small amounts of seawater can actually temporarily prevent dying of thirst. At the time, however, it was believed that any amount of seawater could be deadly. Parker had gone far beyond what anyone would recommend even today. By the next day, he was lying in the bottom of the boat, suffering from stomach cramps and diarrhea. Even before this, Dudley had discussed with the other seasoned sailors the, quote, custom of the sea. It's hard to trace when this practice first started. It likely traces itself to the first time humans sailed beyond the sight of land over vast distances. When stranded, out of supplies, crews would resort to cannibalism. Sometimes this would take the form of drawing straws, like in the Poe story. Still other times, the crew might wait for someone to die from injury or natural causes before consuming them. Dudley told the others that if it came to it, Parker would be the logical choice. He was the weakest of the four, having poisoned himself with seawater, and it might be the only way to save the other remaining men. There would be no need to draw straws. Days passed, and Parker showed no signs of improvement. On the 25th of July, after 3 weeks of drifting in the South Atlantic, Dudley told Stephens, "The boy is dying. You have a wife and 5 children. I have a wife and 3 children. Human flesh has been eaten before." Brooks took no part in the discussion, refusing to entertain the idea of consuming the boy. And it was true. It had been widely reported the infamous failed Franklin Arctic expedition of 1895 to 1848 had resorted to cannibalism after becoming stranded in the ice. The 1820 case of the Essex, a whaling ship struck by a sperm whale, cast away at sea for 90 days, they gave in to the custom of the sea. That story would actually inspire Herman Melville's Moby Dick, although I don't remember anybody eating each other in Moby Dick. Even the starving time at Jamestown Colony led to cases of cannibalism, and the lore of the sea was filled with countless other stories of desperate men doing the unthinkable. Stephens said they needed to hold off on a decision. When day broke the next morning, Parker looked worse. It had been 7 days without food and 5 without water, and not a ship in sight. They didn't draw straws. It was the captain, Dudley, who took charge. According to their later depositions, they shared a stern look. Then Dudley ordered Stephens to take hold of Parker's legs in case the boy struggled. The captain then took his penknife and cut the boy's jugular. Catching the blood in a chronometer case, they passed it between the 3 remaining crewmen. Drinking the blood was a desperate act to save off thirst. The body was then stripped and butchered. The heart and liver were eaten while still warm. Strips of flesh were cut away and set aside for rations. Then what remained, the parts they refused to eat, were tossed over the side. Eating human flesh might have saved them, but it was an act that must have caused some real psychological questions. It was also temporary. The flesh quickly began to rot and was soon tossed into the sea. Not lasting as long as they hoped, they might once more have to give in to the custom of the sea. Now, I don't know what you think, but if you're Brooks in this situation, I mean, Dudley and Stephens have already killed Parker, and Brooks' moral reservations might have made him the odd man out. But luck came their way in the form of a ship on the horizon sighted on the 29th of July. The Montezuma was a German vessel returning on a voyage to Hamburg when it spotted the tiny raft. This itself was a miracle. The ocean is vast, and even to one of the massive ships of today would be a little more than a dot, let alone an 1880s life raft. The emancipated crew The emaciated crew was taken on board the Montezuma and cared for. It took a month for the ship to reach Falmouth, England, where the 3 survivors disembarked. Lucky to be alive, they had a horrifying story to tell. Dudley, as captain, made no attempt to hide what had been done. It was, after all, a long time honored, if not horrible, custom of the sea. He believed that what he had done was right. He'd sacrificed one man who was likely to die himself to save the lives of three others. It was a call that he, as the captain, had the right, if not duty, to make. The people of Falmouth were sympathetic to the plight of the crew. Many likely couldn't honestly say that they would have done any different in the similar circumstances. But local authorities also had a duty to do, and they had to report any violent deaths aboard British ships. And the Minuet sailed under the Union Jack, as did its lifeboat. The shipping master sent a telegram to the Board of Trade in London, and it was after sending that telegram that the shipmaster, much to his own disappointment, had to arrest the three survivors. Captain Dudley was shocked. He and Stephens were the first people in the history of England to be charged with cannibalism at sea. After all, the doctrine of necessity had long been accepted in Western law, even if that meant taking a life. It is, after all, the basis of self-defense. Across the pond in the United States, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, had written in 1881's Common Law, even the deliberate taking of a life will not be punished if it is the only way of saving one's own. Brooks was not charged, having refused to take part in either the killing or the discussion beforehand. He would serve as a key witness at trial. There was no question that Dudley, with the aid of Stephens, had killed Parker. Both men had recounted the events on the life raft multiple times to numerous people, including the arresting officers. What had to be determined was if they were justified in killing the cabin boy. At an earlier time, this might not have even seemed like a question. However, this was post-Enlightenment Victorian England, a more civilized time. England and the world were longing to show that humans had moved beyond their baser nature of man. The trial opened at Exeter Assizes under Justice Huddleston. It would be moved, however, to a special panel of judges of the Queen's Bench Division. Basically, the case would be heard by a panel of 3 judges, led by Lord Chief Justice Coleridge. The defense was based on the idea that Dudley and Stephens had done what was necessary to preserve the greatest number of lives. This was nothing new. An untold number, finding themselves in the same situation, had drawn straws and sacrificed a shipmate for the good of the group, or had consumed shipmates who had passed away. Parker was, at the time, as good as dead, the seawater, the thirst, and starvation having taken its toll. It was, as they said, the custom of the sea. The prosecution, they had a different take. There had been no drawing of straws, no luck of the draw. Parker had not even taken part in the discussion to kill and eat his shipmate. It was also important that Parker had not died on his own, but at the hands of Dudley, despite the fact that Parker was likely going to die anyway. The verdict was guilty, and the sentence hanging. Chief Justice Coleridge understood the duality of the situation when he said, "It is not correct to say that there is an absolute or unqualified necessity to preserve one's life. To preserve one's life, generally speaking, is a duty, but maybe the plainest and highest duty is to sacrifice it. So while you have a duty to protect your life, the greater duty is to sacrifice it in order to save others." Parker did not sacrifice himself. It was Dudley who sacrificed Parker. Thus, it was murder. Now, not everyone agreed. Public sympathy was firmly on Dudley and Stephens' side. Lord Coleridge himself even seemed to wonder if he would have done the same thing, while at the same time supporting the rule of law. Quote, "We are often compelled to set up standards we cannot reach ourselves, and to lay down rules which we could not satisfy ourselves." Eventually, there'd be enough public upheaval that the sentences of Dudley and Stephens would be commuted. This case, while English, caused courts across the Western world to call into question the doctrine of necessity. Even in the United States, barely out of the days of the Wild West, judges gave less acceptance to the doctrine of necessity. You do not have the right to take a life in order to save a life. Now, self defense would differ. In self defense, one uses force to stop an attack on them or possibly another person. While Dudley and Steffens and Brooke very well might have died without eating Parker, it wasn't Parker that was trying to kill them. Parker was just as much a victim as they were, albeit partly of his own doing by gulping down massive amounts of seawater, but he was clearly not a threat. The moral question and the legal questions are still debated. How far can you go to save your life? Is cannibalism okay if it's the only way to live? What if the person is already dead? What about a drawing or choosing the person you're going to eat by some kind of luck? What if, like in the case of Parker, the person was going to die anyway? Is it okay to speed the process along? Legally, you cannot kill someone and eat them. Hopefully, you didn't need to be told that, even if it's to save your own life. But are the legal, moral, and practical all the same? If faced with the slow, painful death by starvation and thirst, would we behave any differently? Can we even know for sure how we would act? This has been History is Criminal. Join us again next week as we jump back to another dark tale from the dustbin of history. Until then, if you like what you heard, tell a friend. If not, tell an enemy. Never suffer alone.